Hello and welcome back to the Building HVAC Science Podcast. It's our goal here at Building HVAC Science to help create better, more knowledgeable HVAC and building performance technicians by helping the two professions better understand each other with the ultimate goal of making customers happy in the homes they live in and the buildings they work in. Now, today we go down the path more oriented towards commercial HVAC. This episode, Eric and I have the pleasure of meeting and speaking with Tony Mormino, who is the Technical Sales and Marketing Director for Insight Partners, which is a commercial rep firm in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Tony's been involved in sales engineering and now in marketing for Insight Partners. He's developed something called the Engineers HVAC Podcast, as well as the HVAC TV YouTube channel. We talk with Tony and have some fun discussing how things are communicated in media and how he got there and how it's important to document versus create. Tony shares with us some of his journey and some of the new things they're doing at Insight Partners, including development of professional development hours, PDHs, for professional engineers. He does a lot of interfacing with sales engineers, and we actually get into asking a good question: what exactly is a sales engineer? So let's find out more from Tony Mormino as he discusses his projects and his process on HVAC TV and his other podcast efforts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Building HVAC Science Podcast. Eric Kaiser here, and Bill Spohn is in the room, and today our special guest is Mr. Tony Mormino with Insight Partners. Welcome, Tony.
Hey, Eric, and hey, Bill. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. This is a lot of fun.
So as a fellow podcaster and media person, man, we got to know a lot about you in the preview to this podcast recording here. Share with the listeners, what's Tony doing now and how did he get there?
Oh, great. Yeah. So I'm the marketing director. My official title is Technical Sales and Marketing Director for Insight Partners. We're an HVAC commercial rep firm located in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. I've been in the HVAC industry for about 25 years now, so since 97, and got familiar with HVAC because my dad was an HVAC guy. He was a residential guy, and he took me on some job sites one summer to install residential air handlers in attics in Tampa, Florida, and I realized real quick I might give this college thing a try. So it's hot up there.
That's a hot area to put air handlers in attics, man. Wow.
It's like 8 o'clock and it's already a bazillion degrees up there. So it was awesome. So it's funny. I think I'm here today because of those things 25 years later, but it's amazing how life happens like that. But yeah, so I went to college, I got an engineering degree, and I always knew I wanted to go into sales. So I was looking for jobs. I could use that degree to go into sales. So I started in HVAC sales, and then I did that for 20 years. And then the last 5 years, I've been in marketing, which I stumbled into because when COVID hit, we were trying to find ways to stay in front of customers online. And we started using these tools, and the company liked what I was doing, and I really liked it. So anyway, here we are today with Eric and Bill.
Yeah. And I love in your LinkedIn profile, there's a very important person that said, the Engineers HVAC Podcast is the best in the world. Who gave you that quote?
A lady named Marie Mormino, who's my mom. So she's got if she likes it, that's cool with me. Everybody else could hate it. I love it.
She's got the chops to say that, I think.
That's right. They're my biggest fans. So hi, Mom, if you're listening. And Dad.
So let's dig into what Insight Partners does. What's the business about? What's your role? And you did mention a little bit, but give us a little bit more detail and nuance. Who owns it and what products are sold?
We're a commercial HVAC rep firm. So in the commercial HVAC business, we have agreements with, in the Carolinas, about 60 manufacturers to be their individual or their sole rep in that area. So when someone wants to buy a specific type of equipment that we sell, they come to us, we sell it, we support it. We do a lot of the upfront work too with the engineering community, whereas we'll help them design the equipment, we'll give them the selections, the budgets, work through different options, give them like an ABC option, good, better, best scenario. Here's your pros and cons to each. And then they'll pick something, put it on the plans. Contractor will shop it out, buy it out, and hopefully we'll get the order. And then we sell it, and then we have the parts to back it up, the service, any type of support during the installation or after the fact with parts. So typical commercial HVAC rep firm type setup. We're not typical because we're the best, of course. Obviously, that goes without saying, but
I'm going to check that with your mom.
Came out of my mouth. I was like, oh, I got to pull that back. But that's what we do. And we're really big on trying to give back to the HVAC community. So part of what we do online is to do training for engineers, which is a big source of our, if you can get in early on the jobs, this is no big secret, you have a much better chance of getting the order. If you're the trusted, you want to be the trusted source for the engineer. Like, hey, Tony, I've got this job. What do you think? What type of equipment? Can you give me a couple options? Yada, yada, yada. You want to get that call and be in a position to do that. So we feel like using these online tools helps us better position ourselves to do that. So,
what are some of the topics you cover in your social media and how do you deliver it? Like, what channels do you use? What's the length and the typical content?
We're purely on, like, our tagline is to educate and empower the HVAC community in terms of when it comes to the content we produce. And we've learned a very important thing about content. People want something that's valuable to them. They don't want to hear, they don't really care a whole lot about your company, like what's happening at your company. It's good to promote that stuff and give that information as brand building and to grow your brand that way. But really, at the end of the day, the person listening is what's in it for me. You've heard that radio station, WIIFM. So we're trying to ask ourselves every time we post, what's in it for me? Like, I just did a post this morning about, here's the conditions outside. And if you had a makeup air unit, what mode would it be in? Would it be in cooling, heating, dehumidification, or vent mode? And then I'll let people answer that, and then I'll post the answer to the next day. So it's just a way to use, like, to bring education to the HVAC community. So primarily that's what we do. We do long form content, which is conventionally anything over 10 minutes. I would say long form today is anything over like 8 seconds. It's kind of a little bit of a joke, but it's really hard to get people's attention. So a little story about that. My son, Mason, he's all into social media. He's doing everything. And a few months ago, TikTok, or maybe a year ago, allowed you to upload a 10-minute video. And I'm like, hey, Mason, look, you could upload 10-minute videos to TikTok now. And he was like, who would watch a 10-minute video? He was just like baffled that someone actually would spend 10 minutes to watch a video. So that's a long way to answer your question. But we do long form. We'll do 1 hour PDH seminars, and then we'll chop that up into bits and distribute them on the platforms like we're on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube Shorts, and LinkedIn. And the strategy we use is we try to use the short clips as teasers to get them back to the longer, to get them attached to our YouTube channel and our podcast.
So you mentioned PDHs there. What are PDHs for anybody that might not understand that term?
Great question. So professional development hours. So a lot of our target audience is professional engineers or PEs in the HVAC world. So they need a specific amount of PDHs per year, and we can provide that online today, which is really nice. It's nice for them. It's a great way for us to give back and, again, get connected to our customers and to build our brand and to serve them as well, which is a big part of one of our core values is working together, we're stronger. So we truly try to live that. Believe it or not, it's not just something on paper. And we have found, and you guys probably know this, the more you give, the more you build your brand and the more you grow. It's counterintuitive to what we would normally think. A lot of the content I'm familiar with is you can come get this valuable information, but we're expecting something from you. When we don't do a lot of that, we're just like, we're going to broadcast this. If you want to watch it, great. Here's your PDH certificate. So we have found that's a tremendous way to not only to give back to the HVAC community, but to grow our brand at the same time, which is really nice.
And that really works well, I think. And I've seen that starting to work well a lot more in recent years where people are just putting stuff out there. But that makes all boats rise at that point. Everybody gets better. The industry gets better as a whole. And everybody comes up to a better standard that way. Now, some of them seem to do it kicking and screaming, but a lot of people are really interested in wanting to get better. But it's hard to find information. It's hard to sometimes travel to these conferences to get that information in an in-person way. And that's where the online communities have, I think, really stepped up and done a great job, and happy to be part of that with all the different avenues out here of bringing that information to people in their living rooms or their offices or their cars or their hotel room or wherever they might be, their service van, whatever.
100%. I am shocked to this day how many people watch commercial HVAC engineering reels and podcasts. It's shocking to me. It really is. And it's like, the podcast was not my idea, I'm afraid to say. Like, the president of my company came to me. This is hilarious. So he comes to me and goes, hey, I heard this engineers podcast out in California in our HVAC industry. What do you think about starting that? I'm like, who would listen to a podcast about HVAC engineering? And I was like, I had no idea like people would listen to that. And then a few months after that, I saw one of our competitors was starting a podcast, and I'm like, oh, no, I can't let them go first. So I scrambled and I threw one together like in 2 days and had one up. And I was just shocked. People started listening to it. I'm like, oh man, people actually are listening to this. So yeah, to your point, it's a great tool to use. And as far as like learning how to use it, the best way to do it is to just do it, just to get out there and do it. And I know you all have heard this because you're experienced podcasters, but like I'll meet with someone and they'll say, we really want to do this, but we're really afraid it's not going to look or sound that good. And I said, I got the solution for that. You ready? I'm going to give you the secret. It's not going to look that great or sound that good. It's not supposed to. It's your first one, right? Like if I tried to run a marathon, it wouldn't go real good because it would be my first one. So
the YouTube channel is HVAC TV, and that's at HVAC-TV.com. I pulled it up over here on another screen. Congratulations. Almost 10,000 subscribers. Maybe this podcast will drive you over. You're 9.9 and 814 videos. That's pretty amazing. Do you keep track of like what's the most popular thing? Do you look at statistics and see what is attracting the most attention?
I learned like people and products get the most attention. The holy grail for us, and we just did this amazing live podcast we rep a company called CDI, which is an active desiccant dehumidifier company. This is a very specific, very niche-y thing, which a lot of people probably will never get involved in the HVAC business, but they do stuff like minus 80 dew point air for lithium ion manufacturing. So very niche, very specific, but this stuff looks so cool. So when you're in the factory and you're standing in front of it and you're explaining it, that's the kind of stuff online. Like that's the holy grail of me doing a PowerPoint online is probably the least engaging. So everyone's so sick of PowerPoint. I'm sick of it too. Sometimes they'll do stuff in front of the whiteboard, which actually does pretty well because it's a whiteboard and people could relate to that. But so to answer your question, yeah, I do look for what people are going to respond to, but it's like anything else. It takes a long time. And the reason we have a lot of those videos up is because we do a lot of shorts. Like I dropped one today and I'm going to probably do one after this, but they're pretty easy to do. The long form takes longer to put together. But yeah, so we look for trends. We look for what people get excited about, and we try to do a little bit more. The funny thing is, it's not necessarily the content. It's the way you present it that's key. Like psychometrics has been psychometrics for 100 years. It hasn't changed. But the way you present it and the way you talk about it on the platforms is a big deal. So
there's a lot of things to figure out in there. And I think all of us are really just figuring this out as we go, as you said. It's jump in and do it. And delivering that message is really neat and very important. I'm pretty excited to talk to other people that do that sometimes. I'm going to geek out over here. I geek out about HVAC, but now we're geeking out about sharing HVAC.
Oh, I love this. I hope you have a timer because I could literally talk about this for 5 hours. It's so exciting to me. So
we may have to cut it off short somewhat before that.
That's right.
Yeah. And the focus is commercial HVAC systems, again, around the equipment that Insight is repping?
Correct. Yeah. We try to focus more on the science and the systems than on the specific equipment. Like you'll see very few, in terms of our online content, you'll see very few, this product A is better than product B for these 5 reasons. Nobody really wants to see that. That's a commercial that has its place, and that's called selling. That's what our guys do when they're going out in the field to selling. But in terms of marketing, we have found that good marketing really provides value, and it takes someone from point A to point B in whatever their journey is. Like they're trying to learn more about HVAC, they're trying to learn more about desiccants, they're trying to learn more about pumps. If you can help them on that journey, that's the goal of good marketing. It's a subtle difference, but it makes all the difference when you're doing online content. As you guys probably know, if you just got on and did tool commercials all day, no one would probably listen to them.
Where do you gain inspiration for the different approach that you have? Is it something natural or something you study or watch or exposed to?
Sometimes it just pours out of me. Lately, I've been struggling. I've been having to force myself to sit down and do it. But I think we all go through these ebbs and flows in our career. And sometimes it's literally pouring out of me like I can't stop. I just creating. And then sometimes, like right now, it's a little bit of a pullback. But then I'll go back to, I have a list of posts and I'll go back to start at the fundamentals and I'll start at the beginning. Actually, it's funny you asked that because I just did that today. Like I'm going to start back with psychometrics and work my way through and get that inspiration going again. But one of the big lessons I've learned, and I've learned this from somebody else, I didn't create this, but is to document rather than create. So I'm not sitting down creating. In other words, like someone might call me and ask this question. Boom, there's the content. Like, hey, how do you get from point A to point B or do this or whatever? Then I'll make a post out of that. Or like if I go to a factory, that's a no-brainer. I'm going to talk about, while I'm at the factory, I'm going to post everything I can about that factory, et cetera. So
And I think that helps keep things very authentic when you're pulling from life. You're pulling from the real world, things that you're interacting with. It's very timely. And that's what I like about doing this podcast is it keeps new things streaming in front of us all the time, like this conversation we're having with you.
Isn't it funny though? What I have found is if I record something, like if you record this podcast and you wait 6 months to drop it, it will be less effective than if you drop it tomorrow. There's something about the people know. I don't know how do they know? Like, how do they know it's this time of the year? And it could be just the way we're talking, the words we're using, or the way we're dressed. I think they call that relevance, but it's the same with if I post a reel, like I was outside this morning, I'm up in the mountains. It was cool. It was foggy. It was rainy. They know that it's probably that time of year for the mountains. But if it was snowing and I posted it, they would be like, this just doesn't fit. It's weird.
Anything new and exciting you're working on now that you'd like to talk about?
We're talking about this a little bit beforehand, but so PDH credits are something we focus a lot on online. And New York and New Jersey is a little stringent. They have a little different rules than the rest of the state. So we just got approved. I think we have 4 PDH presentations and we're going to launch that. Our podcast is called the Engineers HVAC Podcast. That's going to be called the Northeast Engineers HVAC Podcast because they don't really have a way that we can find. There probably are some out there to get online PDH content in a way that's fun. We found like online streaming when you're watching it live on LinkedIn or YouTube. That's a fun way to watch it. It's a little more engaging than going into like a GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar or one of those types of platforms. That's pretty exciting to start that. I'm curious to see how that's going to go. So,
how much do you think your sales engineer experience helped in doing what you're doing today? Is that your audience really that you're speaking to?
It's so funny you say that. So like my job today, I don't look much more different than when I was a sales engineer. So when I was a sales engineer, my primary audience was mechanical engineers and mechanical contractors. That audience really hasn't changed. And when I was in the field, a sales guy, I would have given a lunch and learn presentation every day if someone would have had me because it's so valuable. And I always enjoyed giving back and I always enjoyed teaching. The problem is they don't want salesmen in their office every day, so you didn't get to give that many of them. So today, it's really just an extension of that. I look at what I do as the same thing, except on a wider net. So I don't know how in today's world, online world, someone does marketing who doesn't have the experience into what they're trying to market. It's a little different if you're selling hats or fitness wear. You can get your handle around that. Like that's not rocket science, but what we do is so complex. And I have marketing folks who I know and respect, and they're great marketers, and I learn a lot from them, but they can't make the content. So in today's world, if you can't make the content, you're relying on some other source to make the content. But a lot of the guys who have the content are so busy and they're not content creators. So it's like you're pulling teeth. So it's very difficult. So to answer your question, it's invaluable. And I was talking to when I was at the CDI factory, he was talking about getting someone like me to do that job. And that position doesn't exist. I just happen to be at the right place at the right time and really enjoy it. But to have the technical guy do the marketing and be online and I think there's a new wave of people coming who are, I don't know, online sale. I don't know what you would call it, but because it's tough, because if you want to reach customers today, you've got to be online. Like if you want to do it at scale, and folks who are not online on these platforms, it's hard to explain to them the power of when I go to the AHR show, the people that come up to us and recognize it's ridiculous. It's insane. Like we just hired some guy and he was onboarding. He goes, man, I've been watching your videos for 3 years. I can't believe. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is not. And I don't say that like to be braggy, but I just say that to be like, I'm always shocked when people want to watch what I do, but I'm glad I work for a company that sees the value in that and lets me do that for a living because it's really a lot of fun. So.
I'm going to veer off in a little bit different direction here with this, Tony. We've used this term sales engineer, and that runs around in the industry a lot. What exactly does a sales engineer do from your perspective?
Man, that's a good question. It's funny you say that too, because when I started in 97, we were talking about that earlier. I was like, I want to go into sales. And I would go to the library. They used to have these things called libraries. Remember those? And we would go there and I would try to look up there was nothing. And there was this new thing called the World Wide Web, which had just come out. And I'm like, how do you use this thing? And it just so happened I was talking to my guidance counselor at the time, and he handed me a flyer, and there was a guy literally in an hour doing a seminar on what a sales engineer was. It was a guy it was a local train sales manager who I ended up working for 10 years. So I went and saw that. So a sales engineer is basically a consultant to the consultants is what we say. Like their job is to go in because mechanical engineers are really good at sizing the building load, designing the system, but they need help with, there's so many different products out there. There's so many different ways to design it. So a valuable sales engineer is a consultant to the consultant. Like he might call up and say, hey, I've got this school. The owner's looking at this. What are the pros and cons? And I would just tell him. And a good sales engineer always says, yeah, here's the pros and cons. And we might not be a good fit for that job, actually. The stuff we have is overkill, you might want to call it. So you're really truly a consultant to them. And then when you're right for the job, you're going to the contractor and you're trying to close the order and sell the equipment. So it's a very unique position as a degreed engineer calling on engineers, but you're also a sales guy.
You perform the process of selection.
Correct.
From available alternatives in matching and things like that. Now, we'll continue in this veer off direction. Thanks, Eric. Talk about how artificial intelligence might play into this or play against it. What are your thoughts there?
Oh, man. I'm a big fan because I'm terrible at writing. Like everybody's good at something. Like I'm pretty good with getting on and doing the videos. Like a lot of the reason we do videos because I can't stand to write and it's more engaging. I'll split it up into two buckets. So for marketing, we use AI all the time. If it was me and this was my podcast, I would drop the audio, I would transcribe it, and I would say, AI, write me a description of this podcast for my podcast. And it pops it out, 5 paragraphs. You go in and you tweak it a little bit and you change a word here. And it's like heaven. And the good thing is that's your content. Like you created the content. It's just moving it around and organizing it. Hey, I just recorded this podcast. Give me a 500-word blog post. The audience is mechanical engineers and mechanical contractors who are new and seasoned. Pops out. So we use it for that. AI, I just had a guy on my podcast who is designing tools to read plans and specifications and to come up with a summary of, okay, you need 5 rooftop units. They should have these 5 features and this like that. I haven't used that yet, but that stuff's coming and I'm a big fan of it. I'm not really scared of technology. I know every time new tech comes out, there's a lot of fear of this and that. And I just think about like when the iPhone came out, I was a BlackBerry guy and I'm like, I'm not giving this thing up. I like my keyboard. And like how many people have said that? And then now I love my iPhone.
I wish we could see a show of hands right now of who remembers the BlackBerry. It's listening to this show.
We're really dating ourselves probably. We talked about the World Wide Web. By the way, that's www for you youngsters who don't know where that comes from.
Yeah. And then what was the other one then? The Palm Pilot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like the description of AI as a co-pilot. You're not giving up responsibility, but you gain assistance and you still have to have oversight. That's the approach that I take when I use AI in my work. And I do use it a fair amount, not always continuously, but it does help with the podcast production. It helps getting that timely content out so we aren't talking about snow and sweaters in the middle of summer.
It's a great tool. It's an enhancer, not a replacer. I look at it the same way you do, like a co-pilot for sure.
It's definitely changing the world around us rapidly. But I'm with you, Tony. I think it's going to be, we've seen a lot of changes in the industries in our lives, and it's going to go in all what direction it goes, but we're just going to have to work with it and shape it in some ways, I think.
100%.
I would say on the sales engineer veer there, it almost sounds like that sales engineer is a specialist. That PE is an umbrella for a whole job, and then you have specialists for each section of the job. And HVAC, of course, is really complicated when we're talking about conditioning the inside of a building. So that sales engineer is a really helpful person to the job, and a good one especially.
Yeah, I would think most PEs would tell you they couldn't do it without a good, trusted sales engineer. And a lot of them have their 5 guys, their 5 go-to guys. I really loved being in that position. And my favorite call to get was, hey, we're looking at doing this. And I would tell them, don't use us for that. We'll be too expensive. Because it like builds a trust and it's real and it's authentic and it's a lifetime thing. I was in Jacksonville for 20 years. And 90% of my business came from the same people over those 20 years. So it is a very valuable career. It's not talked about a lot. We've done a few YouTube videos on what is a sales engineer, because I don't think in the engineering community, I don't think people even know what it is.
And that was why I asked the question, because it gets tossed around a lot in the industry, but it's not really well defined by a lot of people. And even the service technicians or anybody else out there that's listening may have heard that term and said, what is it? But not asked the question. So who better to ask than somebody who's been there and done that?
We have probably a larger amount of residential contractors that listen to the show because of the home performance aspect of it. maybe not so many commercial, but I see online a lot of times, hey, I'm thinking of getting into commercial, or I think of leaving commercial. Let's talk about getting into it. If you're moving from like a primarily residential light commercial into full commercial, what kind of skills you need to possess? What kind of approach should you take?
Man, it's such a different industry. I don't know, to be honest with you. That's not my area of expertise. I would say take your time. I could tell you this. Here's my experience. When I have bid a job to a residential guy trying to break into the quote unquote break into the commercial industry, be very careful if you're going to do that, because a lot of times the equipment is way more complex than you may budget 2 days for the install, but it could be 2 weeks. You just don't know. It's like a VRF system versus just installing a couple ductless split systems. It's a whole other ballgame. Then you got to live with the product after the fact in the system. So I would say, I guess from my experience, I would say proceed with caution, be very careful, maybe go work for a contractor in the commercial world for a while first, or hire some guy who knows that business. It's tough today. It's tough for the small guy to break in because there's so many big contractors out there. So that would be my advice. Take your time, proceed with caution. Don't get in over your head on some big job because you can get in some big trouble and attorneys can get involved and you could, yeah.
Either you own the education or the system owns you. Very good. Eric, you have any other questions for Tony?
Man, I got a lot of questions, but I'm not sure we have that much time here today.
Okay. It was a pleasure getting a chance to interview you, and we encourage people, we'll put some links in the show notes to your LinkedIn because you have a really nice complete listing of all the different points of contact that you have going. Any closing thoughts you'd like to leave with our listeners?
First of all, thank you, Bill and Eric, for having me on the show. And closing thoughts would be if you're in the HVAC industry and you want to try to use these tools to give back, it's been a great way for us to do that. And was said earlier, I think the rising tide raises all boats. So I'd encourage everyone to try and give back. And if you see someone online who's giving back, try to be constructive with your criticism, because I do see a lot of people out there who I would call, I don't know if they're bullies or not, but it's like, I'm jumping in there like, take it easy to the kid. He's trying to get out there and show what he's learned. Let's build each other up. Let's not tear each other down as an industry. That would be my closing thoughts.
Thank you. Very good.
Man, I love that. That's awesome.
That resounds. It resonates. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much for coming on today.
Thanks again for listening into this episode of the Building HVAC Science Podcast. The Building HVAC Science Podcast is a production of TruTech Tools Limited. In full disclosure, I'm a co-owner of TruTech, and the opinions voiced are those of my guests, my co-host, or myself, depending on who is speaking, of course. And if you're in the market for tools or test instruments mentioned in our podcast, or just have a need or desire in general, take a look at what TruTechTools.com's offer. That's TruTechTools.com. And you can use the offer code HVACBS for a nice discount. Thank you for listening to the Building HVAC Science Podcast. And there's always a lot of great resources out there. Got to add to my list, HVAC TV and all the work that Tony Mormino is doing. Of course, we have other great people in the field that are trying to share content, create content, and share it, like HVAC Our School, HVAC Shop Talk, Stephen Reardon, HVAC Reefer Guide, Tool Pros, Service Business Mastery, Quality HVAC, HVAC Overtime, HVAC Our Videos, HomeDiagnosis.tv, AC Service Tech, Measure Quick, HVA Chicks, and the Misfits of HVAC, along with the HVAC Grapevine. Again, lots of great things out there, lots of way to absorb and learn content, and most of it's for free. So there's no excuse. Get out there and learn something today. We hope you learned something in this podcast today. We welcome you to come back to Building HVAC Science again in the near future. Take care.